On March 4th, 2026, Qatar's own defense ministry confirmed what U.S. commanders had hoped would never happen in an active conflict. The statement came just before 3 a.m., Qatar time, late Tuesday evening in the U.S., and by Wednesday morning it led every outlet covering this war. An Iranian ballistic missile hit Udeid Air Base, the largest American military installation in the entire Middle East, and it got through. 2 missiles were launched. Qatar's air defense intercepted 1. The second one struck the base directly without causing casualties, per the official Qatari statement. That last part, no casualties, matters, but it is not the story. The story is that a missile penetrated the most defended American base in the region, and the consequences of that single data point go far beyond whatever a damage assessment will show on the next satellite pass over Qatar. Here is what we know from confirmed sources as of March 4th. And here is why this specific event matters more than almost any other development in this conflict right now. Al Udeid is not just the largest U.S. base in the Middle East by physical footprint. It covers roughly 31 square kilometers, twice the size of Ramstein in Germany. It is the forward headquarters of U.S. Central Command, the command structure that oversees every American military operation from Egypt to Pakistan and beyond. The Combined Air Operations Center inside Al Udeid, what the military calls the CAOC, plans and directs all U.S. air missions across a theater stretching from North Africa to Central Asia. When Iran put a missile into that perimeter on March 4th, it wasn't targeting a fuel depot or a barracks. It was targeting the brain of American air coordination across the Middle East. Now let's talk about what specifically was hit, because this is the detail most live coverage is moving past too quickly right now. Satellite imagery from Planet Labs, later confirmed by Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell, shows clear damage to the radar dome at Al Udeid Air Base. Inside that dome sits the Modernization Enterprise Terminal, a secure communications hub linking U.S. commanders across the entire CENTCOM area of responsibility to leadership in Washington. The system provides encrypted voice, video, and data services. It became operational in 2016 at a cost of approximately $15 million. That confirmed hit was the first piece of damage acknowledged officially. But OSINT analysts working satellite imagery on March 4th identified what appears to be damage to a second, far more expensive and strategically critical asset at the base. The AN/FPS-132 is an upgraded early warning radar built by Raytheon, valued at $1.1 billion, positioned at or near Al Udeid to provide the regional missile defense architecture with its primary detection layer. It is designed to detect ballistic missile launches from distances of up to 5,000 kilometers, and it feeds real-time targeting data directly into both Patriot and Theody interceptor systems across the Gulf. According to OSINT analysts and defense reporting from Defense Security Asia, satellite imagery shows structural damage consistent with a missile impact on the AN/FPS-132 installation. The IRGC claimed to have destroyed the radar entirely. The Pentagon has not officially confirmed or denied damage to the AN/FPS-132 specifically as of March 4th, which is a pattern worth noting on its own terms. What is officially confirmed is the radar dome hit, the Modernization Enterprise Terminal, acknowledged by Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell. The AN/FPS-132 status sits in a confirmed by OSINT, undenied by Pentagon's own as of March 4th, and that ambiguity is itself a data point. Here is what the AN/FPS-132 actually does in practical terms, and why even partial degradation of this radar changes the math for every interceptor battery in the region simultaneously. Every Patriot and Theody battery in the Gulf depends on early warning radar data to calculate intercept trajectories against incoming ballistic missiles moving at high velocity. The more warning time the system has, measured in seconds, the better the intercept geometry and the higher the probability of a successful engagement before impact. Degrade or destroy the radar feeding that data, and you don't just lose one sensor. You shorten the reaction window for every interceptor unit in the region at the same time. In my view, that is the precise strategic logic behind targeting this specific asset. Iran wasn't trying to destroy the base. It was trying to blind the architecture designed to protect it. That logic becomes clearer when you look at the broader Iranian targeting pattern from February 28th through March 4th across the entire Gulf theater. Western media reports citing satellite imagery confirmed Iranian strikes damaged radar and defense infrastructure at multiple U.S. installations simultaneously. The list includes the 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, Ali Al Salam in Kuwait, Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, and Al Dhafra in the UAE. The pattern is deliberate and consistent. Target the sensors first, shorten the warning windows, reduce intercept probability for the next wave of missiles and drones that follows. Now let's address the Patriot performance question directly, because footage circulating on March 4th raised serious questions that deserve a serious analytical answer. Video taken at Al Udeid showed 3 Patriot PASI-3 interceptor missiles launching against incoming Iranian ballistic missiles in the same engagement window. and failing to achieve confirmed kills. Qatar's defense ministry pushed back on reports that its Patriot interceptor stockpiles were depleted, stating they remain well stocked at the base. That specific claim, Qatari Patriot stockpile levels, appears to be accurate based on all available public evidence as of March 4, 2026. But a separate and confirmed structural problem exists on the U.S. Army side, documented publicly before this conflict began in earnest. According to reporting from July 2025, U.S. Army Patriot missile stockpiles had already fallen to just 25% of the volume the Pentagon itself deemed operationally necessary for sustained air defense operations. That degradation happened largely because of large-scale Patriot transfers to Ukraine during the Biden administration from 2023 through 2024. Prioritizing that theater came at a direct cost to forward-deployed readiness in the Gulf, a trade-off now visible in real operational terms. In practice, this means that even where the hardware and trained operators exist, the inventory to sustain a prolonged intercept campaign is structurally constrained in a way it was not 2 years ago. Since February 28th, according to U.S. Central Command Head Admiral Brad Cooper, Iran has launched more than 500 ballistic missiles and approximately 2,000 drones against American and allied targets across the region. That combined figure, 500 ballistic missiles, 2,000 drones, is not a number any finite interceptor stockpile absorbs indefinitely without pressure on the inventory becoming a real operational constraint. Here is the broader context that makes March 4th different from a standalone military incident, and it requires going back 5 days to understand the full sequence. On February 28th, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, a coordinated large-scale military campaign against targets across Iran. Strikes hit nuclear facilities, missile production sites, and military infrastructure simultaneously across multiple Iranian cities and regions. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in the opening strikes on February 28th. Confirmed by Iranian state media on March 1st and acknowledged publicly by President Trump on Truth Social. Iran's response began within hours and was named Operation True Promise 4 by the IRGC. The numbering itself signals. This was a pre-built contingency plan, not an improvised reaction assembled in real time. Targets included Al Udeid in Qatar, the 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, Al Dhafra in the UAE, and Ali Al Salem in Kuwait. Strikes also hit positions in Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq, and Israel, all activated in a single coordinated operational sequence. The strike on Al Udeid on March 4th was therefore not the first Iranian missile to reach this base in this conflict. It was part of a sustained and escalating campaign running across the entire Gulf theater. And here's the historical detail that reframes everything we are watching right now. Because this is the second time Iran has broken through Al Udeid's defenses, not the first. On June 23, 2025, during the 12-day war, Iran struck Al Udeid using Fateh 313 missiles, a lower-end system, and Iran even gave advance warning hours before the attack. One missile penetrated the defense network. The radar dome housing the modernization Enterprise terminal was damaged. U.S. officials initially said all missiles were intercepted. Satellite imagery proved otherwise. Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell confirmed in July 2025, one Iranian ballistic missile impacted Al Udeid Air Base on June 23rd, while the remainder were intercepted by U.S. and Qatari air defense systems. What we are watching on March 4th, 2026, is not a new vulnerability being discovered under combat pressure for the first time. It is a known and documented gap being exploited again, at larger scale and with considerably more capable weapons than the June 2025 strike used. A pattern: test the defense in 2025, identify the precise gaps, return in 2026 with a refined strike package designed around those gaps, is not improvisation under pressure. It is a systematic engineering process. The Fateh-2, which Iran describes as a hypersonic glide vehicle, was confirmed deployed in the current campaign targeting Gulf bases. According to Fabian Hintz at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, it carries a maneuvering re-entry vehicle designed to shift trajectory in terminal flight. That maneuvering warhead adjusts its trajectory during the terminal descent phase, precisely the window when Patriot fire control computers are making their final intercept geometry calculation. In my view, the most significant development on March 4th is not the physical damage at Al Udeid. As serious and confirmed as that damage is, it is the confirmation that Iran's targeting doctrine has matured into something qualitatively different from what came before. Earlier, Iranian strikes against U.S. assets were calibrated primarily to signal capability and apply diplomatic and military pressure on Washington. What we are watching now is something different: systematic degradation of the infrastructure that makes American air defense function across the Gulf. Those are two meaningfully different things. And this week crossed from one to the other in a way that changes the strategic picture regardless of what the final damage assessment shows. The economic signal arrived immediately. Brent crude moved higher within minutes of the first confirmed reports about Al Udeid, because energy markets understand the connection that military language tends to obscure. Al Udeid is the operational hub that keeps the security architecture functioning across the Gulf, the same Gulf through which roughly 20% of the world's daily oil supply flows every single day. When that hub takes a confirmed missile hit and its primary early warning radar shows satellite-confirmed damage, the risk premium on every barrel transiting the Persian Gulf adjusts automatically and immediately. Drop a comment right now. Does the damage to Al Udeid's radar network change Iran's willingness to escalate further, or does the absence of casualties keep this from crossing a new threshold? I read every single comment on stories like this one, and on this topic, the range of views genuinely matters. Hit the like button if this kind of sourced, layered analysis is what you come to this channel for. It helps more people find this content when the stories that matter most are breaking. And right now, they are breaking faster than any single headline can capture. Stay with me. Here is the number that reframes everything you just heard about Al Udeid, and it comes directly from Bloomberg's reporting on day 3 of this conflict. An Iranian Shahed drone costs approximately $20,000 to produce. The Patriot interceptor missile fired to destroy it cost between $4 million and $12 million, depending on the variant and the buyer. That is not a rounding error. That is a ratio of up to 600 to 1. And Iran has been firing these drones in waves, continuously since February 28th. This is the economic architecture underneath the military story. And in my view, it is the most strategically significant dimension of what is unfolding right now. Let's put concrete numbers around this because the abstractions matter less than the actual math being run inside the Pentagon right now. During the 12-day war in June 2025, the U.S. expended 92 THAAD interceptor missiles to defend against Iranian strikes, according to JINSA analyst Ari Sikarel, writing in July 2025. Each THAAD interceptor cost roughly $12.7 million. That means the June 2025 campaign alone burned through approximately $1.2 billion in defensive interceptors in 12 days. The current conflict is larger in scale, longer in duration, and spread across more countries simultaneously. The math scales accordingly, and it does not scale in America's favor. Here is where the stockpile problem becomes structural, not just tactical. Analyst estimates on total U.S. THAAD inventory vary. The exact number is classified. Kelly Grieco at the Stimson Center put the figure around 434 interceptors as of June 2025, while CSIS data from December 2025 suggested a broader stockpile closer to 632 total units. What multiple independent analysts agree on, regardless of which estimate is closer, is the directional picture that matters most right now. The June 2025 conflict alone consumed roughly 25% of whatever that total figure was, according to CNN reporting from July 2025, citing 2 sources familiar with the operation. The Pentagon requested only 25 new THAAD interceptors in its base defense budget for fiscal year 2026, another 12 through supplemental reconciliation. A total of 37 new units planned for the entire year. Iran fired roughly 400 ballistic missiles at Patriot-equipped countries in just the first few days of this conflict, according to Defense Express estimates cited by Euromaidan Press. Standard military doctrine calls for firing 2 to 3 interceptors per target to maximize kill probability, meaning 400 incoming Iranian missiles could theoretically require up to 100 interceptor launches. That ratio is precisely what compresses interceptor stockpiles so rapidly under the kind of sustained attack conditions that have been unfolding across the Gulf since February 28th. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated this figure publicly on March 4th, telling reporters that Iran produces over 100 ballistic missiles per month. He then said the U.S. can build approximately 6 to 7 interceptors per month to counter them. That is not an analyst estimate or a think tank projection. That is the U.S. Secretary of State describing the production gap on the record in front of cameras on the day Al Udeid was confirmed hit. At that production rate, replacing the interceptors expended in a single day of high-intensity combat takes months, not weeks. Months. That is the production gap the entire defensive architecture is now running against. Christopher Preble, senior fellow at the Stimson Center, told Al Jazeera this week that high interception rates cannot continue indefinitely. He added that the current pace of operations could not be sustained for more than several weeks at current firing rates without serious risk to overall inventory depth. A January 2026 Heritage Foundation report warned that high-end interceptors, including SM-3, SM-6, PAC-3, MSE, and THAAD, would likely be exhausted within days of sustained high-intensity combat. That assessment was published before Operation Epic Fury began, and it describes with precision exactly what has been unfolding in the Gulf since February 28th. That report wasn't describing a future scenario. It was describing exactly what has been unfolding since February 28th in real time, with real systems burning through real inventory. Now here is where the numbers at Al Udeid specifically connect to this broader stockpile picture, and it requires understanding how Patriot batteries actually work under sustained pressure. A Patriot battery does not have unlimited reload capacity sitting next to it in the field. Each launcher carries a finite number of interceptors. Reloading takes time, and radar systems need to be fully operational to cue each launch accurately, which is exactly what the Al Udeid strike targeted. When Iran targeted the AN/FPS-132 early warning radar at Al Udeid, confirmed through OSINT satellite imagery on March 4th, it was not just destroying a sensor, it was shortening the available reaction time for every Patriot battery that depends on that radar's data feed to function correctly. Less warning time means the intercept geometry is harder, and harder geometry means lower kill probability on every shot the battery fires at an incoming target. Lower kill probability per shot means more interceptors expended per incoming missile, just to achieve the same basic defensive outcome as before. In my view, the radar targeting and the drone volume strategy are not two separate approaches. They are one integrated system with a single objective: accelerate the depletion of American interceptor stockpiles, blind the radar, force the defense to fire more shots per target, sustain the drone and missile tempo, watch the inventory compress. That is the operational logic connecting everything we have discussed. The financial asymmetry Bloomberg described this week, $20,000 drones against $4 million interceptors, is what makes this logic economically sustainable for Iran. That asymmetry is what makes this approach structurally problematic for the United States over any timeline that extends beyond the first few weeks of sustained exchange. Defense Express calculated that if 400 Iranian missiles were engaged by Patriot systems alone, the cost of that defensive effort ranges between $4.1 billion and $9.6 billion, depending on the interceptor mix used. Iran's offensive missile production costs a fraction of that. Norsk Luftvern put it directly in their analysis this week. The economic asymmetry between attack and defense systematically favors the attacker. Trump pushed back on this framing Tuesday, posting on Truth Social that U.S. munitions stockpiles at the medium and upper medium grade have never been higher. He wrote that wars could be fought effectively and successfully using those supplies, and that the U.S. could fight forever. That claim sits in direct tension with what independent defense researchers have been publishing since before this conflict began. Both the Heritage Foundation's January 2026 report and CSIS analysis from December 2025 pointed to the same structural bottleneck in high-end interceptors. In my view, the honest picture sits between those two framings. The U.S. does have significant munitions capacity at lower tiers, but the specific bottleneck in high-end interceptors like THAAD and PASI-3 MSE is real, documented, and not resolved by pointing to that broader figure. Here's the dimension that Asia Times flagged on March 4th, and that almost no mainstream outlet has connected directly to what happened at Al Udeid. The munitions drain in the Gulf has direct and documented implications for U.S. readiness in the Pacific theater, a connection that defense analysts flagged explicitly on March 4th. If THAAD and SM-3 stocks are compressed by the Iran campaign, the inventory available for a potential Taiwan scenario shrinks at exactly the same time. China has been watching this conflict with precise analytical attention since February 28th, and the reason is not difficult to identify. The rate at which U.S. air defense inventories are consumed in sustained combat is exactly the operational data Beijing's military planners have been modeling for years. This is not speculation. Asia Times reported directly on March 4th that China is closely observing U.S. missile stock depletion over Iran. The implications for Pacific theater readiness were the explicit frame of that reporting. Not a footnote buried at the end, but the central analytical conclusion. What this means in practical terms for Al Udeid going forward is this. The base has absorbed confirmed hits, and its radar dome is officially damaged. OSINT imagery suggests potential additional damage to the early warning system that feeds the entire regional defensive network. And the interceptor inventory defending it, along with every other Gulf base, is being consumed at a rate that production cannot match on any timeline relevant to the current conflict duration. In my view, that combination, degraded sensors, compressed inventory, sustained incoming fire, is the actual strategic situation on the ground at America's largest Middle Eastern base as of March 4th, 2026. The story is not whether Al Udeid is still operational. It is. The story is the rate at which the conditions required to keep it defensible are being systematically eroded. Stay with me. Here's the detail most coverage buried under the missile counts and base damage reports on March 4th. And it matters more than almost anything else in this conflict right now. The Strait of Hormuz is not technically closed, but it has effectively stopped functioning for the global shipping industry. And the distinction between those two things is narrower than it sounds. As of March 4th, over 150 ships are anchored outside the strait, waiting, not because Iran physically blocked them, because their insurers did it for them. Every major marine war risk provider has cancelled or suspended coverage for vessels in the Persian Gulf. Norway's Guard and Skuld, Britain's North Standard, the London P&I Club, and the American Club. That group represents the backbone of global maritime insurance. And without their coverage in place, commercial shipping through the Gulf effectively stops regardless of military escort availability. Without that insurance, no commercial tanker captain transits the strait, regardless of what naval escorts are available or what flags are flying overhead. The economic mechanism works faster than any military order. Sheel Bhattacharjee, head of freight pricing at Argus Media, described it directly. Most ship owners were avoiding transits after insurers canceled war risk coverage, even while the waterway was not officially closed. This is the architecture Iran spent years building. Not a military blockade enforced by ships and guns, but an economic one. It activates automatically the moment maritime insurers calculate that the risk premium in the Persian Gulf has exceeded acceptable underwriting limits. On March 4th, that architecture is fully operational. The IRGC declared the strait closed on March 2nd. CENTCOM disputed that claim. But vessel tracking data from KPLR showed tanker traffic near zero, regardless of who was technically right about the legal status of the closure declaration. Here is what that traffic stoppage means in concrete numbers, because the abstractions are less useful than the actual flows that have stopped moving. The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 20 million barrels of oil per day, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. That is roughly 20% of all global oil consumption moving through a waterway, just 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. According to Kepler, roughly one-third of all seaborne crude exports globally transit this single corridor every day without interruption under normal conditions. Add to that 19% of global LNG flows and 14% of global refined products trade, all moving through the same narrow channel. The benchmark freight rate for very large crude carriers hit an all-time record of $423,736 per day on Monday, March 2nd, per LSEG data cited by CNBC. Those are the supertankers that move 2 million barrels at a time from the Gulf to China. That rate was a 94% jump from Friday's close in a single session. Brent crude was trading around $73 per barrel on the Friday before Operation Epic Fury began. By Tuesday, March 3rd, it had surged past $81, nearly 10% higher in under 4 days. Prices touched above $88 intraday on Tuesday, a level not seen since the height of the June 2025 conflict, before Trump's announcement about naval escorts partially stabilized market sentiment. Trump announced Tuesday that the U.S. Navy would begin escorting tankers through the strait if necessary, and offered government insurance for Gulf-bound shipping. That announcement pulled prices back meaningfully from their intraday highs, but the underlying conditions that drove them there in the first place had not materially changed. Iran's IRGC still controls the coastline. At least 5 tankers have been damaged since February 28th, and 2 crew members killed. And protection and indemnity insurance has been formally removed for the period beginning March 5th, 2026, the day after this script was recorded. That last detail, insurance removed starting March 5th, is the specific data point that makes the economic picture structurally different from previous Iran crises. Past Iranian threats to close the strait moved markets briefly, and then faded as the threats stayed rhetorical and no ships were actually struck. This time the insurance market is not treating it as rhetorical. It is pricing it as a real operational risk with a specific effective date of March 5th. Bob McNally, president of Rapidan Energy Group, described the worst case plainly in CNBC reporting on March 1st. A prolonged Hormuz closure is a guaranteed global recession. He estimated the probability of that extreme scenario at roughly 33%, given Iran may feel it has little left to lose at this stage of the conflict. Multiple Wall Street commodities strategists have already published their closure scenarios, warning that a sustained Hormuz disruption drives Brent above $100 per barrel. Ali Vaez at the International Crisis Group told Al Jazeera that prices would not just spike, they would gap violently upward on fear alone before a single additional barrel was physically disrupted. Now here is the geographic dimension that makes this economically different from any previous Gulf crisis, and it requires understanding who actually depends on Hormuz most directly. The United States imports approximately 7% of its crude through the Strait of Hormuz. Domestic shale production has substantially reduced direct American exposure over the past decade. The countries with maximum exposure are in Asia. China, India, Japan, and South Korea together accounted for 69% of all crude oil flows through the strait in 2024. According to EIA data, China alone imports roughly 40% of its total oil through this single corridor, according to UBP estimates cited by CNBC. Around 30% of China's LNG imports come from Qatar and the UAE. the same flows that have now effectively stopped moving through the strait. Qatar halted production at its Ras Laffan and Mesaid industrial facilities on Monday after Iranian drone strikes hit both sites, according to multiple reports. That is not a price risk or a market sentiment story. That is a direct physical supply disruption to one of the world's primary LNG export hubs. In my view, the energy economics of this conflict are what will ultimately determine its duration and resolution, more than any missile exchange or base damage assessment. The United States can absorb $80 or even $90 Brent crude without triggering a broader economic crisis under most modeling scenarios. But it cannot absorb 100 plus for an extended period without reigniting the inflation dynamic that defined the Biden years and that Trump explicitly campaigned against. China is in a more acute position. Beijing imports 40% of its oil through a corridor now near zero on traffic, and its Qatar LNG suppliers have halted production. China's LNG inventory stood at 7.6 million tons as of late February per Kepler. Substantial, but a buffer measured in weeks rather than months. That creates a structural incentive for China to push toward a negotiated resolution, one that no military posturing alone generates. China's economic exposure to a sustained Hormuz disruption is large enough that it becomes a diplomatic pressure point from a direction Washington did not fully anticipate. In my view, this is the underreported dimension of the entire conflict as of March 4th. Iran did not just hit Al-Udeid with a missile. It activated an economic architecture now applying pressure simultaneously to energy markets, shipping infrastructure, insurance systems, and the supply chains of the world's two largest economies. All of that runs in parallel to the military campaign. The economic mechanism does not require Iran to fire another single weapon to keep generating pressure. The insurance withdrawal alone is sufficient to maintain the disruption until something fundamental changes on the diplomatic or military track. That combination, military attrition at the base level and economic attrition through the strait, is the full picture of what the strike on Al-Udeid sits inside. Stay with me. Here's the question the entire diplomatic and military establishment is circling on March 4th, and that no one can cleanly answer. Who exactly is the United States at war with right now, and which entity inside Tehran actually holds the institutional authority to end it? Iran now has a 3-member interim council standing in for a dead supreme leader, and a president who campaigned explicitly on diplomacy and economic stabilization. It also has a revolutionary guard that, according to Iran's own foreign minister, is operating independently of civilian authority. And it has a nuclear program whose operational chain of command is, at minimum, deeply unclear as of the morning of March 4th, 2026. The Interim Leadership Council was established on March 1st, the day after Khamenei's death, per Iran's Constitutional Article 111. It consists of President Masoud Pezeshkian, Chief Justice Gholam Hossein Mohseni Ejei, and Ayatollah Alireza Arafi of the Guardian Council. Constitutionally, this council holds the powers of the supreme leader until the Assembly of Experts selects a permanent successor. On March 3rd, Iranian media reported that the Assembly's office in Qom was struck, reportedly during a session convened specifically to begin that selection process. That strike on the Assembly of Experts is, in my view, one of the most consequential and underreported events of this entire conflict. It is not just an attack on a building. It is an attack on the constitutional mechanism Iran uses to reconstitute its central authority after the loss of its supreme leader. Whether intentional or collateral, the effect is the same. Iran's ability to resolve its own succession crisis is now operating under active military pressure. That combination creates a situation with no real historical precedent in the modern era of nuclear-armed state conflict resolution. A nuclear-capable state is now governed by an interim committee, under active bombardment, with its constitutional succession, body disrupted. Iran's centrifuges were still spinning as of the last IAEA inspection in January 2026. Its military is now operating with acknowledged autonomy from civilian command. Trump told The Atlantic on March 3rd that Iran's new leadership wanted to resume negotiations, and that he had agreed to talk to them. Iran's security chief Ali Larijani publicly rejected that characterization the same day. "We will not negotiate with the United States," he posted on X. The two sides are not even in agreement about whether they are willing to talk, which is a different problem from disagreeing about the terms of a deal. They are exchanging contradictory signals about negotiations through public statements, while simultaneously continuing to fire missiles at each other's infrastructure. Trump told the Daily Mail the operation in Iran could last approximately 4 weeks. "It's always been a 4-week process," he said in a phone call with the outlet. Separately, U.S. officials speaking to Ynet before the strikes began had envisioned a 4 to 5 day operation that would return a weakened Iran to the negotiating table. 4 days in, the negotiating table does not appear to be where this is heading. Iran is still firing. Al-Udeid was struck on day 4. The Hormuz insurance corridor collapsed on day 3. In my view, The gap between what Washington planned for and what is actually unfolding as of March 4th is the most important structural story of this entire conflict, not as a criticism of any political position, but as an analytical fact about how military operations interact with the complex systems they are designed to pressure into compliance. The June 2025 12-day war provides the clearest reference point available for what resolution could look like in this conflict. That war ended after 12 days through a U.S.-Qatar-mediated ceasefire, with Iran preserving regime continuity and oil prices returning to pre-war levels within days of the agreement taking effect. But the four conditions that made that June 2025 resolution possible within 12 days no longer exist in the same form as they did then. Khamenei was alive. Succession was not in question. The IRGC was operating under centralized command. The Hormuz insurance market had not yet collapsed. And critically, the United States and Iran had a shared understanding of who held final authority on the Iranian side and could actually deliver a ceasefire commitment. All four of those stabilizing conditions that enabled the June 2025 ceasefire are now absent or significantly degraded as of the morning of March 4th, 2026. That does not make resolution impossible. It makes the path to resolution structurally more complicated than anything the June 2025 playbook prepared either side to navigate. China's role in determining what comes next deserves substantially more analytical attention than it is currently receiving in Western media coverage of this conflict. Beijing's Foreign Minister Wang Yi called for an immediate ceasefire and an earliest possible return to dialogue in a phone call with his Russian counterpart on March 2nd, according to CNBC. That language is diplomatic standard boilerplate that Beijing has used in multiple previous crises. What is not standard is the magnitude of economic pressure sitting directly behind it this time. China has roughly 40% of its total oil imports transiting a corridor now near zero on traffic. Its primary LNG supplier halted production on March 2nd. Its buffer reserves are measured in weeks, not months. China has more direct economic leverage with Tehran than any other external actor currently engaged in or commenting on this conflict by a substantial margin. It purchases over 80% of Iran's oil exports, according to Kepler, and has provided financing, technology, and diplomatic cover to Tehran for years. It now has a direct, quantifiable, and urgent national interest in seeing this conflict reach a negotiated end as quickly as possible. In my view, that alignment of interests creates a diplomatic channel that does not require Washington and Tehran to agree to talk directly. China needs Hormuz open. Iran needs China's economic relationship intact to survive any post-conflict reconstruction period. That mutual dependency is the architecture of a back channel. The question is whether that channel activates fast enough to matter before the economic pressure compounds past a recoverable threshold. Every day the insurance corridor stays closed, Asian energy markets tighten, and the economic damage to China, India, Japan, and South Korea compounds. Every day the succession crisis continues unresolved. The IRGC's operational autonomy expands further in the absence of centralized civilian oversight. And every day Udeid remains under credible missile threat, the operational picture for U.S. air operations across the entire Middle East. Theater carries a risk premium it did not carry 6 days ago. Zoom out now to the full picture. Because the four things covered in this video connect into a single system, and that system is what makes March 4th, 2026 different from every previous escalation in this conflict. First, a ballistic missile breached the air defense perimeter of Udeid, demonstrating that Iran's missile adaptation since June 2025 has produced real operational capability against layered Patriot systems. Second, the intercept mathematics driving that breach are structural, not situational. U.S. Patriot inventories are at roughly 25% of Pentagon-assessed requirements. The cost asymmetry between Iranian attack systems and American interceptors runs as high as 600 to 1. That ratio does not improve through willpower or rhetorical resolve. Third, the Hormuz corridor closed, not by military blockade, but by insurance withdrawal, taking roughly 20% of global oil supply offline simultaneously. Qatar's physical LNG production at Ras Laffan was halted on top of that, removing a fifth of global LNG export capacity from a single drone strike. Fourth, Iran's succession crisis has removed the centralized command structure that made a negotiated off-ramp possible in 12 days during June 2025. The entity that would need to agree to stop firing does not yet have a clear face, a clear chain of command, or a defined set of red lines that Washington can actually engage. These four factors are not four separate stories about a war in the Middle East. They are one integrated system running simultaneously and reinforcing each other in real time. A missile breach that degrades American operational confidence in its own forward defenses. An interceptor shortage that makes sustained defense mathematically and financially costly at scale. An economic mechanism that applies compounding pressure to Asian markets without requiring Iran to fire another single weapon. and a leadership vacuum that makes diplomatic resolution structurally harder than at any previous point in this entire conflict. In my view, the most important development to watch over the next 72 hours is not another missile strike or another oil price move. It is whether President Pezeshkian, the only figure on Iran's interim council with a genuine mandate for diplomatic engagement, signals a willingness to separate the ceasefire question from the succession question. If Pezeshkian can establish enough authority over the IRGC to deliver a genuine cessation of strikes, the Hormuz insurance market can begin to normalize. Qatar's LNG production at Ras Laffan can resume operations, and the June 2025 U.S.-Qatar diplomatic template becomes usable as a workable framework once more. If the IRGC continues operating with acknowledged autonomy from Iran's civilian interim council, none of those off-ramps are realistically available to either side. The strikes continue, the insurance stays withdrawn, the economic pressure compounds, and the 4-week timeline Trump referenced becomes the minimum estimate, not the ceiling. What happened at Al Udeid on March 4, 2026 is a significant data point in a conflict that is far larger than any single strike. A missile through the world's most important American forward air base is not nothing, but the data point only acquires its full meaning in the context of the larger system it sits inside. And that system, military, economic, diplomatic, and institutional, is exactly what this entire 4-part video has been built to explain. The base was hit, the technical explanation for why it was hit, the math that made the hit geometrically possible despite Patriot defenses, the economic architecture that activated within hours of the first strike, and the political vacuum that is making resolution structurally harder than anyone in Washington or Tehran planned for. That is the real story of March 4th, 2026, not a headline about a base that got hit. A system that explains why it happened and where it goes. Thank you for staying through all 4 parts of this. If this kind of analysis, where systems matter more than surfaces, is why you're here, subscribe and hit the bell. Drop a comment below. Do you think a genuine ceasefire is realistically achievable within Trump's stated 4-week operational window? This channel is built to cover what the numbers underneath the news actually mean, and why those systems matter more than any single event. I'll see you in the next one.